Well, the weather outside is frightful, but let's hope there are more little frightful things that we're going to bump into in today's episode. We are going to be traveling not too far from where I am. In fact, we're going to be in the city that I was born in. It's Vancouver, British Columbia, here on the lower left Canadian coast, and I am going to be discussing some of the haunted places that are in my neighborhood, so to speak. And I want to make the point of saying that, yeah, we can watch paranormal TV shows and they talk about things on the other side of the country or other side of the world, but look in your own neighborhood. Look at your theaters, your schools, your old churches, your old government buildings, stuff that has existed a while. And we're going to talk about why some places may be a little more haunted than others and what could cause a energy from many, many years ago to become visible to you in our century. Here on the West Coast, Europeans have been poking around here since, I think, Francis Drake in 1579 showed up and probably drew some pictures of what was going on around here. First Nations, on the other hand, have been here between 8,000 and 10,000 years and having full social life and an entire society up and down the coast here of what is now Canada into the United States. Spanish showed up here in the 1790s. And then we had Simon Fraser, an explorer, move his way across Canada, show up here and decide to name a few things after he and his cohorts, because that's what Europeans do when they find something that no one else has names for. So yeah, the Fraser River runs through the valley that I live on now. Things that happened here in Vancouver, we had a gold rush in 1858, and I think around 25,000 gentlemen came up from California, which wasn't a town then, just basically a boat dock. The city of Vancouver itself, well, we talk a bit about that. We talk about Gastown, named after Gassy Jack Dayton, who was kind of a saloon owner back in the day. And we're kind of glad it wasn't called Gassy Town. We'll talk about that a bit. It was incorporated back in 1886. That's when Vancouver was actually incorporated, and was very busy again. And another gold rush, 1898, I believe, was the Klondike Gold Rush, and there were a lot of buildings here outfitting those people. One of the places we talk about is a restaurant back in the day, like last week. It's still here. In 1970, it opened up. It's the old spaghetti factory, and you probably have those places out where you are. But this is in a building called the Malcolm Building, which built in 1907. And it was a number of warehouses this gentleman had built, and the warehouses supplied the trade route, which was up and down the coast here and over to the Orient and into down, Hawaii and all up and down the West Coast. So the building's been around for a long time, but in 1970, the old spaghetti factory moved in. We are going to talk about the history of that place, the ghosts that have been seen, and the possibility of a portal, or why they're seen in that building more than a few of the other buildings around. We also talk about a wonderful structure. It's St. Paul's Hospital, originally a 25-bed wooden structure built in 1894, and then in 1912 torn down and a full-on stone building erected and expanded on over the years. And our guest was lucky enough to get in, not only to poke around, but to interview a lot of the people who had worked there and still do work there in his book series. Let's talk about that wonderful book series and our guest author. Greg Mansfield grew up just south of Vancouver, actually in the same town that I grew up in, Richmond. He was fascinated with ghosts and the paranormal. And I'm not going to say from, a real young age, though he and a few of his buddies were over in Wales and did have an experience and witness a hovering formation of UFOs over a field in Cardiff in broad daylight. We touch on that. We touch on why that specific field and that location. But, despite visiting many haunted places in Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, Greg has actually never seen a ghost firsthand, but he certainly hopes to. And while he hasn't seen a Sasquatch either, he did get those UFOs off his bucket list. He's calls himself an open-minded skeptic, which is good, because you need those. Specifically, if you're going to go out and poke around in this field we call the paranormal. He's a part-time member of the Cold Spotters, Vancouver-based group of ghost investigators and enthusiasts. Greg is, I would say, an authority on haunted places in Vancouver. He's got an entire series in his Ghosts of Vancouver haunted places. He's up to, I'm going to say 39 haunted places right now, haunted locations. But honestly, he's probably got 50 to 70 in his back pocket, ready to pop out of his next part of his series. So this is an expanding series. Go to his website, ghostsofvancouver.com. Again, ghostsofvancouver.com, and poke around and see what writings he has available, and on also his blog, where he does go out and poke around in these places. And he is in, a number of these blogs are his interviews he's done with local media out here. It's a very, very interesting area. He is a wonderful resource for this area, but I really want to make you aware that you live in an area that is haunted too. No matter where you live, it is haunted. Everywhere is haunted. But why are certain areas more apt to bring on that full apparition? What is it in the geography, in the area, that actually allows some people to see them more often than others? And we do talk about that. Yeah, we bounce around to a few haunted houses he's been to out here, having some, again, interviewing people with a lot of experiences, and talking about our hometown. So I hope you enjoy it, and I do hope you come away with this as being a bit of a eye-opener for the town that you live in too. And you don't have to go to some famous place on the other side of the continent or the other side of the planet to go look for a ghost. They're everywhere. Just kind of do some research in your own neighborhoods. Maybe write your own book, and then I'll have you on. But right now, I'm going to get Liam, my funny little alien friend, to introduce our next episode and introduce you to the wonderful author, Greg Mansfield.
I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Hey, Greg, how are you today?
I'm excellent. Thanks, James.
It is good to have you here, and it's nice that you're local. And, which is interesting because I think the last ghost person I was talking to is Andrea Perrone, who lives in Florida, who the whole house she lived in the northeastern part of the U.S. was the one based, the Conjuring series were based on. That was her family.
Okay. Oh, okay.
That's a bit haunting. But yeah, but at least you're close to here, and we're going to talk about some places that I'm actually familiar with.
Okay, and maybe some you're not.
I hope so. This is kind of cool. Now, I want to, for those of you following along at home, I'd like you to go over to Greg's website, ghostsofvancouver.com, and you'll see the number of the books that he's written and learn a little bit more about Greg, which I've already touched on in the introduction, but you can poke around yourself. And also, if you want to look at his books, you can find them through his website and then go to the Amazons and have them send it to you. They will bring it to your house. You don't even have to get off the couch. Oh, actually, you will to get to the door. But the Amazons will bring you his book. A book series, I guess it is now, isn't it?
Well, it's the same book, just new editions every couple of years or so.
Now, you describe yourself as an open-minded skeptic.
Yeah.
Let's go back to when did you first have an interest in that word, the paranormal?
My first interest was sparked off as a kid, growing up in Richmond, BC, at Garden City Elementary School when I was, I think, about 8 years old. We used to have one sort of hour or period a week where we would be taken to the school library. And I remember the librarian's name, Mrs. Martin, and she was lovely. And one Halloween around that time, we were taken in and we were being encouraged to read books in the school library about Halloween and so forth. And all the kids were taking books off shelves, about Charlie Brown, and the Great Pumpkin and various, kiddie books about ghosts and Halloween. And I can't remember how it sparked off. It was so long ago, but I must have said something to Mrs. Martin to the effect of, "Are ghosts real? Is this a real thing?" I was, probably uniquely inquisitive in the class at that time. And she said, "Well, some people do think they are, Greg." And I remember her walking me over to the bookshelf, and there were 2 or 3 books by such classic authors as Peter Underwood and Colin Wilson. And one of them was about ghosts and poltergeists. And I think it was by Colin Wilson. I can't remember. And so I took the book out of the library and I devoured it at home and was fascinated. And of course, it gave me a bit of a chill, but for an 8-year-old, you'd think I'd be crawling under the bed, but I wasn't. I was just fascinated that these things could actually be real. So that was the starting point. And then in junior high, I went to a school where we used to have to do a written report on something about once every 4 to 6 weeks. And I remember most of my reports, and they only needed to be, 15 to 20 pages long, handwritten in those days. But they'd all be about this, paranormal, such as ghosts or UFOs. I remember doing a couple of reports on UFOs, and that's been a fascination of mine as well. But yeah, it's been from a young age. And then as I got older, I have family in the UK. My mum grew up in Wales, my dad in Nottingham, England, and would visit family in South Wales. And my aunt told all kinds of tales about her encounters with, supposedly real spirits in a hospital where she worked in South Wales. And she, I believe, is very psychic and attracts those things. So it's just been ongoing.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting heritage. I found that when I talked to a lot of people who have had experience with images, being spirits, ghosts, whatever energies, a lot of them, if you're Caucasian, will come from Wales, well, anywhere through the UK, Ireland, over top of Scandinavia, with a dip in the Black Forest in Germany, and the inside of the boot of Italy and the coast of Spain or France and Spain, and in the Morocco area.
Yes.
It seems like that's our closest to being an indigenous person, is going back to 300 or 400 years, and we were still seeing things moving on the land and elemental.
Yeah, what you touched on there was the whole Celtic connection as well, with Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and then back, Normandy and so on. Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's
fascinating.
Dark-haired Celts as well. My aunt in Wales is dark-haired, and there's a long lineage of Welsh behind her, and she definitely has something going on.
Yeah, my grandmother, who is from northeast UK, England, she talked about having a great grandmother that she remembered, and she described her as a witch.
Oh,
black hair and brown eyes, and just this she saw things. And it's like, oh, that's kind of creepy. Your open-minded skepticism works well for an investigator or somebody who is doing research, because you aren't satisfied with the answers that you get, which is
Quite right.
which leads you to the next question.
Yes.
The next question. Let's bring you forward to when you were actually getting out and thinking, oh, this is this paranormal thing. I can say it out loud now. There are other people doing it, and they're not everybody's going to think me crazy. I could actually go back to my high school reunion now and say, see, I wasn't crazy. You teased me back then about the stories I wrote, but it's changed, thankfully, a lot. When did you first start dipping into it? Now, we talked off air a bit about being a member of a group called Cold Spotters.
Yeah, well, let's go back a little further, and that was, and I like what you've said there around, when it became, let's say, a little more mainstream and a little more accepted to be talking about these things. And I think it kind of dawned on me that was happening when I started seeing television programs like Most Haunted coming out of the UK in the early 2000s. And except for that darn Derek Akora, who was lying about his psychic impressions. Anyway, I thought it was a great show, still going. Yeah. And then, of course, Ghost Hunters came up, and Ghost Hunters International, and it just became more mainstream. And then in around 2007, I thought, well, look, I know how to build websites. I know how to use WordPress, etc. I'm going to, darn it, build a website about Vancouver, because nobody had done it at that time, and I didn't find any books on it other than some books by Robert Bellick, but he's more about the ghosts of British Columbia and so forth, not concentrating on Greater Vancouver. Anyhow, so I developed the site, and I thought, oh, I'll be lucky if I get maybe a dozen locations from initial research. And well, gosh, quickly I got well beyond that. We're now up to, well, the book has 39. My files have 50 plus, but I haven't investigated them all or researched them all. Anyway, to come to the Cold Spotter story, around 2009, 2010, I was reached out to by Amanda Quill, who is one of the founders of Cold Spotters. And she said, hey, love your website, would love it if you came out to a meetup that we're doing at the old spaghetti factory in Gastown. I said, yeah, I would love to. So attended my first sort of luncheon meeting there, and the rest, as they say, is kind of history. And I haven't been on all the investigations with them. I wish I had more time and availability to do them all. I have been on several, and they've kindly invited me out to many. But yeah, I want to do more, but sometimes time and work gets in the way.
Life.
Yeah, life.
Yeah.
This isn't my day job. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, this isn't the one that pays the bills.
No.
Yeah, it puts food on the table. You tagged along with a few of the things. It's interesting you say the old spaghetti factory. Let's update the listener a little bit about where you and I live in this part of the world.
Sure.
We're on the lower left Canadian coast, on the mainland, or what we call the lower mainland. And Europeans have been here since about the mid 1800s. It'd be primarily the British and the Scottish, over to Vancouver Island. And I always want to point out it's the second largest island in the Pacific Ocean. There they had more of an influence, First Nations going back to the 1600s with the Spanish as well as the British. And up north, actually the Russians. Before then, it was all First Nations, and those lovely Haida people from way up north would come down and do raids and slave runs and pillaging the coast. They're the First Nations Vikings, you could probably say. But most of this side of the Pacific Northwest is relatively new to us European descendants. The buildings here aren't much older than the late 1800s. The ones that exist still that are made out of stone. And it was pointed out to me a few years ago at an Oregon Ghost conference. A lot of the people had come out from the eastern side of the continent to make their fortune out here, whether it was mining or logging. And they always, a good portion of them wanted to go back, make their fortune, go back to Chicago, Toronto, wherever. So they built homes out of wood. because it wasn't going to last for, like, they didn't care. They weren't going to be here in 25 years, and off they went. So we don't have a lot of that East Coast heritage, gorgeous stonework. We have a
Yeah.
bit of it, but not enough. So when you were going out to do, and I shouldn't say, I clarify myself there, or point something out. It doesn't have to be old to be haunted.
No.
I've been into a townhouse complex from the 1980s. It was crazy haunted. And it wasn't haunted by somebody from the 1800s. It was haunted by somebody from like last Thursday. It was bizarre. So that said, but there are locations that are more active, let's say. I think the ghosts are everywhere. Just they seem to pop up in certain locations a little more than others. And you touched on your first get together with the Cold Spotters paranormal team at the old spaghetti factory in the area of Vancouver, British Columbia, called Gastown.
Yes.
Yes, and obviously you poked around and did a little bit of research on what, why that was kind of interest to the paranormal team.
Yeah. Well, Gastown is where I started with the website. It's the most obvious. It is the oldest part of Vancouver. And for your viewers who, from outside of BC who don't know about Gastown, why it was named that, and that was after Gassy Jack, one of the characters in the late 1800s who opened up the town as it was then, near it, the sawmill, opened up a small saloon and brought over a barrel of whiskey down river from New Westminster, and opened up the first saloon, and it soon became known as Gassy's Town. And he was called Gassy because in those days, an expression for someone who talked too much is they were gassy. Yeah. Not because they had gastrointestinal issues, but because they were so talkative and full of themselves. Apparently, he was a real character, so it became known as Gassy's Town, and then shortened to Gastown. And Vancouver could have kept that name, except the government stepped in later on and said, no, that's not a good enough name for such a wonderful place. And first they tried to name it Granville, and then they ultimately settled on Vancouver after Captain George Vancouver.
Captain George Vancouver, who was one of the lesser British explorers.
Lesser, but no less brave.
Yes, but that if you went back to England and talk about Captain Vancouver, they're like, oh, who?
Who?
Yeah, it's like, no.
Captain Cook, maybe, but Captain Vancouver, no.
Captain Cook was on Vancouver Island.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
He showed up there. Yeah.
And on one voyage, Vancouver was his first officer.
Yes.
So you and I obviously share a love of history, so it's fun to chat about that.
Yeah. Well, it's old stuff.
It's old stuff.
I'm old, damn it.
I know, and that's part of the attraction for me is not just the ghosts, but the history of the location they haunt. So to get back to the old spaghetti factory, we came kind of roundabout there, but it is one of the best known haunted locations in Vancouver, if not the best known. That and a couple other places that we can touch on later. But yeah, it gets the most hits on my website for people's interest.
What is it that's more haunted about that place? What type of activity have they reported?
It's I would say there's lots of layers through time there. It was originally the building, I can't remember when it was built. It was late 1800s. It was actually a storage warehouse for grocery wholesalers. And why that would be especially haunted, I really don't know. However, psychics have gone in there, and if you believe what they say, they've said there is a portal, a vortex at the back of the restaurant, near the back wall. And this is interesting, James. I know you've talked about this before, and that is if anything is close to water, whether underground or nearby stream or something, or a rail track, it tends to kick off paranormal phenomenon, ghosts, and so on. Well, at the back of the restaurant, back of the building, guess what? There's a major spurs there, rail lines coming in to the old port of Vancouver and to the nearby station, waterfront station. So perhaps that's a reason, I don't know. But the psychics say that the ghosts can come and go through the portal in the back. And
Interesting.
I do believe that some of the ghosts are full-time residents as well, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
And,
Have you heard the story about the little boy?
yes, he actually, I'm the one that actually broke the story about the little boy on the website and in the book first. And that was through an interview when I did a TV interview with Red Robinson, you know, local broadcaster who's now
Yeah.
retired. We sat in there having lunch after we did the show and the walk around, and we got chatting to one of the former managers there, Chris, and he told us about the little boy. And it's fascinating. I've been fascinated with the little boy ever since, and in fact, feel somewhat sorry for him. I know, anyway, we can talk about him at length, but he seems to me that he's trapped there. He's about 6 years old and maybe doesn't realize what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I
So
get too.
there's layers and layers there. And of course, the best known ghost in the old spaghetti factory is of the conductor in the old BC Electric trolley car inside the restaurant. And that trolley car has been inside there since 1970 when they first set up the restaurant in the building. And he hasn't been seen as much lately. But, you know, going back 10, 20, 30 years, he was seen quite frequently. But
See,
today yeah, go ahead.
I perceived him as being almost residual energy as opposed to a independent spirit energy, or what we would call a
Well,
ghost.
yeah,
But I don't know.
The stories are kind of fuzzy, you know, like a lot of ghost stories. It's hard to get to the truth, and some skeptics may say, well, that's because it's all BS, you know, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think in some cases, absolutely. But in a lot of cases, it's just the fact that if somebody has a ghost sighting, they tell someone who tells someone. And, you know, 20 years later, we know the story, but we don't know the actual person and the actual facts. I try to get to the facts as best as I can. You don't always get to meet the people, but I do interview the latest people who are there, such as the managers and so on. And they say, yeah, you know, we've seen this or we've experienced that. But no, we do know in this case that the conductor hasn't been seen for a while.
Okay.
And another story I've heard lately is that a psychic customer claimed to go in there in the past year or so and apparently cleared the trolley car of the conductor. Apparently she saw him on his way to the other side. I don't know if that's true or not.
That is something, you know, I always get criticized for that because a psychic and a friend of mine down in Washington State, we do that. She actually remote views, goes into a place, clears it, and leaves. Like, and we've done it in a few houses actually locally here, and we've done it as far away as a road. I think it's an old barn now, but was a wagon stop in the countryside in England back in the 1400s or 1500s.
Yeah.
And there was somebody in there that she crossed over. But we do that. It's quite common. But usually when I was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, I went on a ghost tour, and there was this poor woman who had been murdered, and her boyfriend who killed her, his ghost was in there basically still terrorizing with her. And she was murdered in the kitchen, and she was in great distress constantly, 24/7 in distress. And I asked, have you ever thought about having her, you know, somebody come over and cross her over? And they just, you know, all the rest of the people on the tour looked at the tour guides and going, yeah. And they said, no. Well, why not? Because we get paid to bring people here.
Right. Yes.
So let's just keep poking at the bear. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of pay for paranormal, come to an old asylum and poke at the dead people who were poked at while they were alive. And
no.
But anyway, that's a whole other issue. But yeah, it happens. You'll get somebody clearing things out of there, or when they bump into them. And I know my psychic friend Skeeter, she will actually have dead people. Like we'll plan on clearing a house.
Yeah.
She'll remote view, and she'll have half a dozen ghosts show up at the door. Like, we heard her coming. So
right, just literally off the street, so to speak.
Yeah, they come from the neighborhood. And so we had that at a buddy of mine's house. Anyway, whole other issue. But yeah, clearing.
I have heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, clearing, it does it does literally move some of them over. And I kind of
Yes.
feel sorry for the little boy, the little 6-year-old who's trapped. He'd be somebody that you'd think, maybe we should talk to him
I
and
would
let him
I
go.
would think so, yes. At the same time, knowing the kinds of things he does around the restaurant, I think he's running around, and for the most part having fun.
Yeah.
He pulls little pranks, and I don't think he means necessarily to scare people, but he has scared a couple of servers in the restaurant very badly.
Yeah. No,
Just
your interview with Chris, the manager. That's the one where Chris said he saw him under the table when he was closing.
That's the one where very close to the real story, and that's, yeah, it goes back at least 5-6 years now, where Chris was working late night as they do. The restaurant closes at 11, and between 11 and say midnight-ish, they spend about an hour cleaning up after the day and setting tables for the next day's trade. And he was working at the front of the restaurant near the lobby area, the entrance desk. And a young gal was working with him that night in the middle of the restaurant setting tables. And she was there sort of over a table with her head down, and out the corner of her eye, she saw this little boy run past with a flat cap on. And she thought, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense. The restaurant was closed and no children should have been there. And so she went sort of chasing after him, and the boy had run to the back of the restaurant. Now remember, that's where the psychics say the vortex is. But she saw him duck under a table. And so she ran over to the table and looked under, and there he was. He had turned around to face her and was sort of on all fours looking up at her. And the thing with this little boy is he sometimes appears with no eyes in his eye sockets, just blank. And this terrified her. And she ran to the front of the restaurant where she knew Chris was, the manager. And she was just burbling and very frightened. And she said to Chris, or she told him what she had just seen. And she said, I can't work here anymore. I can't do this. And she literally quit on the spot and never came back.
Wow.
And so I don't think the little boy means any harm. I think he's playing games, and I don't know why ghosts appear sometimes the way they do, why they manifest in certain ways. Is it a symbol of what happened to them? Is it a symbol of their psychological state? I don't know. But he was seen doing this very similar move a couple of years later. And I was told this by the more recent manager. And the young gal, it was a very parallel story, saw the little boy. But when she saw him, he had eyes. But she noted that he had a flat cap and a little corduroy jacket and shorts on, which if you look at the old photographs in Vancouver's history, that's the costume that young boys wore sort of late 1800s, early 1900s.
Yeah.
So he's from around that time period.
That's fascinating. We're talking to Greg Mansfield. He's the author of Ghosts of Vancouver and all of the series of books that spawn from Ghosts of Vancouver. Go to his website, ghostsofvancouver.com. The Old Spaghetti Factory is just one.
Yes.
What is it? You're at 39 in your series now? 39?
39 in the book. I don't have as many on the website because, and it's not a shameless plug to get money. It's what I found over the years is that my stories get taken off or copied off the website and repurposed by some unscrupulous bloggers out there who don't give me any credit. And that often happens around Halloween time. Mm-hmm. And it's so obvious that they've either taken it almost word for word and just sort of rejigged it a bit. So I leave everything new that I do research on and write up about now for the book. Perfect. So if people think, oh, he's just doing a cash grab, no, it's more than obviously I'd like to get a bit of money for my efforts. It's never going to make me a millionaire, that's for sure. It's a labor of love. But what incenses me is how so-called journalists are, for some major blogs around town are taking these things and running with them around Halloween.
Yeah. So it's sad, actually. You're doing all the work. You do all the footwork and the research and the interviews, and then they're just up there for somebody else to take.
Yeah, yeah. So it's too
Okay.
bad, but it does happen. So, but yes, back to your question around how many locations. Well, in my notes, I'm 50 plus,
Oh,
and
good.
that extends now beyond sort of what you might consider the core of downtown Vancouver and the initial suburbs. My list goes out in the Fraser Valley now.
Greg, do you actually investigate any of these things with the team, or do you go out primarily do the historic side of the location and then interview the experiencers?
I started off doing mostly research based on interviews and um, referring to old newspaper clippings. And, thanks to Vancouver Library, you can access that now a lot online. And then after meeting the Cold Spotters group and getting part of that, that expanded my world into more actual, boots on the ground investigating and getting stories from them on their experiences. And now with my own experiences investigating with them.
Nice. Well, it's a good way to do it that way too, because you're getting a layman's experience. You are knowing the history of the building. You're getting to understand the neighborhood,
Yeah.
and then you're getting the the questions being asked by paranormal investigators who kind of go in and with their own eye line and see what's going on. So you're getting a feeding from a whole bunch of different angles, which is it makes a good story then.
It does. And when I go investigating too, I'm that skeptical part of me, it takes a lot to impress me. So I'm not looking at or listening to every creak and moan in an old haunted house or location as something paranormal.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not taking every little shadow as something paranormal. It takes a lot to impress me.
Yeah, and it should. It's
Yeah.
I was frustrated. I was on a paranormal team where you'd ask a question or you'd someone would say, if there's somebody here, could you knock 3 times? And you get the and right after that, everyone would be giddy, laughing, joking, talking over top of it. And in the background, when you're going to play the EVP back, you can hear voices that aren't ours, but everyone talked over top of it.
Yeah.
When you hear something like that, you just sit there very quietly, think to yourself, and that's where I was taught this years ago by a guy who was good at paranormal investigation. He said, that's where you pull out your notebook and you just start making notes.
Yes.
Write down the
Yep.
time and all the experiences you had, then talk about it later.
Yes,
It, it's
absolutely.
it's we're not like that television show when you say, if there's somebody in here, please touch me. And when they do touch you, you scream and run down the hall
Yeah, you
in a
jump a
puddle of
mile.
your own urine. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's silly. So be skeptical. Think about it. Well, I shouldn't even use the word skeptical. Just think.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, I heard a
Yes.
noise.
Well, we had a very interesting experience in a haunted mansion in North Burnaby back in September with the Cold Spotters crew, and we were doing a bit of an interesting EVP session. And for your viewers, I'm sure a lot know what EVP is, but electronic voice phenomena, right? Where we're trying to
Right.
record ghostly voices that we can't necessarily hear with the human ear. And there were 2 or 3 of us in the dining room of this mansion, and then another team about 50 feet away down a long hallway. And we were doing some call outs from both locations. Anyhow, we were listening through our recording devices, which is, I find, often a good thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
because you may not catch it with the ear, but through the microphone of my trusty Olympus recorder, I can often hear things.
Yeah.
And we were literally getting responses from a little girl in there who's been known to haunt that amongst other ghosts in this place. And we were getting faint answers from her when my colleague Marlene was asking out to follow her on an ABC game, A, B, C, D, E, F. Can you finish that? And we were getting very subtle little girl voice saying F. And also Marlene asked, "How old are you?" And just a few seconds later, you heard this little girl say, 5. And to Marlene's credit, and not to brag, but to my own, we sat there and looked at each other and kind of went like, isn't this fabulous? But we didn't say anything because it's important not to, really? No,
Yeah.
you do that after the session, as you say.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was a wonderful moment because people ask me, Greg, do you get frightened? Well, yeah, sometimes. But when you're doing a session like that and you get a little sweet girl's voice coming through, it is fascinating. It's somewhat mind-blowing, but it's not frightening. It's just, wow, I want to know more. What is this little girl's story? Why is she here? Is she trapped? Can someone help her?
Yeah.
Those thoughts are going through my mind. And as, of course, it's the fascination of, and that's why we do it. But it's not a game. I realize that if this is real, like we think it is, then there's a human consciousness there that is trapped.
They're where they're supposed to be.
Exactly. Where are they supposed to be? If there's an afterlife, then, do they need help to move on? Some might say that little girl's having fun. She's another one that likes playing pranks on people, just like the boy at the old spaghetti factory. She likes to play hide and seek, so she'll giggle at you and go running off, and you'll try and find her, and you won't find her because she's disappeared, or she's walked through a wall.
That's fascinating when you say that she's walked through a wall.
Yeah.
I went to a metaphysical store here in Port Moody, British Columbia. The first day I walked in there, a gentleman came through the front door wearing a hat like this, had a beard with a 3/4 length black coat on, walked right through the counter and then through the wall and kept going. So what that tells me is he entered a building that is not physical in our time.
Right.
So he probably, because he didn't pay attention to anybody else in the place, he just walked in. So he was walking into a building that existed for him.
Yes.
And we aren't in his periphery at all. Our energy, our living energy isn't there. And I'm always fascinated with that, where you'll have, like, you were in that old mansion. That's a museum now, isn't it?
No, this is Overland Mansion.
Overland, okay.
Yeah, and what it is, it's over 100 years old. It was built in 1907 for a fellow that worked at a major tea importer here in Vancouver and made good money there, obviously, and built one of the first houses in the sort of Vancouver Heights area up on the hill there. Beautiful view of back to Vancouver and the North Shore Mountains. And it's called Overland because before houses were built in front of it, it's a gorgeous view of Lynn Canyon across the harbor on the North Shore with the mountains. So Overland. It's not a museum. No, it's used today. It's pretty much shut up, but it's owned and operated by a seniors home next door. And they use it for fundraising for the seniors home. So they use it for movie and TV productions. So they lease it out for that. And one of the TV shows that's actually been had episodes filmed in there is Supernatural.
Oh yeah.
So how appropriate.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
When you had her walk through a wall, did she walk through a door that was shut, or did she actually go through a wall?
Yeah, we caught an image a couple of times ago. We were there of an arm moving, and we couldn't account for who or what it was. But no, the story is actually secondhand, and that is, or even third hand now. This past summer, a cleaner went into the house on a warm summer's day just to vacuum in the living room there and tidy up, and she looked over, and there stands the little girl staring at her, smiling, and obviously the little girl acknowledged her and turned around and promptly walked through a wall.
Interesting.
And the cleaning woman was not being of the disposition of a ghost investigator, was terrified and ran out of the house and told the manager that she doesn't want to work in there again. There's no way.
Wow. That's interesting. I'm always amazed on who they appear to.
Yeah.
And I always want to talk to the person who sees them and find out, like, What's your sign? How much did you have to eat that day? How much? Where are you from? What kind of background?
Yes,
Have you ever? What kind of dreams do you have? Why you and not why A and not B? Why
exactly.
did this person show themselves to you? Are you a woman between the age of 25 and 35? Could have been similar to her parent, her sister, her mother, that kind of thing. Why does she show yourself to you and not to
Good.
somebody else?
Yeah, good question. And I'm in that sort of category, I think. If it's A, B, C through Z in terms of A being the most psychically impressionable and ghosts come forward to you and you see them, I'm down at Z somewhere. I'm fascinated by this, but I haven't had the fortune of actually seeing one yet, in my own eyes. I've heard them. I've heard the bangs they create. I've heard them on my recorder in real time. Haven't had the privilege of seeing an apparition yet.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Since I started doing the paranormal investigations, the only full body apparition I saw was one I brought home,
Ah,
and he
really?
stood at the foot of my bed.
Huh. Yes,
So
I've heard of such things. Where did you bring that home from?
off Trites Road in Steveston,
Oh, okay.
in a what used to be in the 1930s was a woodworking shop for the fishing boats on the river.
I
And it
know.
was a
Yeah.
Chinese gentleman, which was very fascinating because I described this. It was a Chinese fellow in a leather apron, and he had something in his hands. And I just kept looking at his face. Now, literally, I got home. Usually, when you leave a location, you kind of do a little bit of self-clearing.
Yes.
Please, everything stay here.
Yeah.
Well, we were filming for Shaw Cable, a show they were doing, and it was pouring rain, and it was an hour to drive home. And I just got in the car. It was 2 a.m. because I wanted to do it in the middle of the night for some reason. But so I get home, I lay in bed, and there's light. And my eyes are shut, but there's light flickering.
Yeah.
So open my eyes and look at the ceiling, and it was like a bunch of little yin and yang teardrop
Oh,
things
I know.
moving.
Yeah.
I shut my eyes and opened it again. I went, oh, it must be like an emergency vehicle out front reflecting in the water. And I sat up to look out the window, and he was standing at the foot of my bed.
Huh.
So I looked at it and did what any big tough Mountie would do. Grab my covers, went right back over, and I'm laying there going, what the and I shit, he's still there. So I just meditated and asked, the Archangel Michael to come in and please move him out of here. And that was fine. And then later I got told by a psychic that he went down and was hanging out at a friend's house, or not a friend's house, one of the houses in the neighborhood. They had three young daughters. Oh, he's quite liked it there. Then I was talking to the fellow who managed that whole area down in the Harbor Authority there, a fellow named Jim, whose daughter 20 years earlier, she was now 26, 20 years earlier in the same location, he went up a set of real narrow, very steep stairs to a second level in the Quonset. And she started going up and she's a bit nervous. And this gentleman helped her up the stairs. And she described the Chinese gentleman identical to the fellow that I saw. And he told her that he was making a toy for his daughter. Oh. And she asked her dad who that guy was. And he said, there's nobody here. And that was, and at 26 years old back when this happened, this would have been 2013, 2014. She was 26 and she goes, oh yeah, I remember him. Huh. And I said, yeah, so do I.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he's in my hood now. He's not hanging out there, but that was interesting. That was kind of weird, but that's only full on. In fact, I've only seen in the same investigation, I saw what looked like a black towel moving on the wall like this. And then come down over top of a friend of mine. Yeah. And when we left this room, it had kind of a swinging door, which you could take your pinky and move the door. She was the last one coming out, and the door started closing on her, and she started pushing it, saying, hey guys, this isn't funny. And we're all looking back thinking, what are you talking about? Nobody there. And we literally got her finger and went like that and moved the door. And she said, the door, I couldn't push the door open. It was, she's quite cute, and whatever was there was holding her back in the room. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that was interesting, but that I would say is the only ones I've seen since I was a kid. I came close to seeing one once, and with my ex-wife, and it's what
you just talked about jogged my memory, because you're talking about the yin and the yang, and gosh, I'm going back a good 25 years ago now, when my ex and I were staying at a private residence on the north end of Bowen Island. And for those of you watching who don't know, that's north of Vancouver, about a Horseshoe Bay. It's about a 20-minute ferry ride, and I think Harrison Ford had a house on Bowen for a while there. Anyway, this was a well-known family around town. I won't name the name because I don't want to betray any privacy, but they own this house since the 1930s or 40s on the north end of Bowen. And we stayed there one New Year's for a good 4 or 5 nights. And in the middle of the night, on one of the nights we were staying there in the back bedroom, my ex woke up to see what she described as a paisley shape, a tall paisley shape that you might also call half of a yin-yang symbol.
Yeah.
In a blue fluorescent sort of haze standing in the corner of the room. And she woke me up too late. Didn't get to see it, but there was that you could feel and I'm not a psychic, necessarily all that sensitive, but you could feel something strange in that house the moment you walked in. And sure enough, she saw this thing. So what is it about that shape? I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird. That kind of, well, you talk about people see orbs too. Orbs always are like, I was doing a podcast years ago and literally one was about the size of a golf ball, like kind of a fluorescent-y blue mist went right across the keyboard like this. Okay, that's a little awkward because I was talking to somebody who was all about ghosts and things, and all of a sudden this thing happened. But people will see shapes within the orb.
Yes, true.
And of course, we have that thing. We always want to make it a face. Right. But there are some other geometric shapes, and I don't mean sharp angle, but that kind of arc.
Curves and blobs.
Kind of like best way, like you described, paisley, almost like a fan, but arced. And I'll see them, but I've seen a couple with that weird, bad wallpaper or 1970s shirt paisley thing in it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But always be careful, viewers. When you're looking at videos and photos, don't assume that everything's an orb. 99 times out of 100, it's probably dust.
Yeah. It's interesting. I like the idea of any haunting around an island, because I'm the biggest proponent of Victoria and the Olympic Peninsula being active strictly because we've got that tide coming through from the Pacific, squeezing through twice and in and out twice a day, creating all that energy so dead people can just like flick a switch. It's like Arizona, in Tombstone, Arizona, all that silver and quartz in the ground and the solar loading from the sun. Easy energy. And like and like you say in Gastown, right on the old railway tracks, right on the water.
And on the on the harbor front.
Yeah. So it's, can you have a house that's haunted in the middle of nowhere, out 100 miles from any water? Yeah, sure. You may not see the ghost as often.
Yeah, but you might have water running beneath the house,
exactly,
or the house underground, an aquifer.
Yep. Again, Andrea Perone, who's in the house The Conjuring's based on. I said, where's the closest waterway? She goes, there's an underground river. It goes right under the house. I went, yeah, that'll do it.
There you go.
Yeah. So bizarre. It's bizarre.
And what is it about that? I don't know. I don't know if you've heard any theories about that, but I certainly don't.
No, I think it's strictly they exist as energy. And you know how the people say, well, if you want to come forward, please, you can touch me and use my energy. Or here's a car battery, stick your fingers on it. I don't know. But if they can, and this is why when we're doing an EVP session, we give them 20 seconds, a minute to respond, because they have to get that energy up to the point where they can actually
use it to communicate.
And my understanding, that's where the cold spot actually comes from. you feel a cold spot is because they're taking the energy from
Yeah,
that environment, and that
yeah,
which makes it cold.
it's the drain.
Yeah, they're using it. So that there, again, in our neighborhood, Crescent Beach, south of Vancouver, British Columbia,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, we had a client there who was being terrorized by a ghost, and she had a restaurant. It's called the Sunflower Cafe, and people would come in and they'd be paying their check, and they'd look behind the lady taking their money, and the plates would come up off the counter, hover, and then smash on the ground, and
Okay,
they'd
yeah.
freak out, and the lady go, "Oh, I got to clean that up." It was just, we said, "Well, why do you think this is going on?" We found out there was an outcropping of quartz that came up
Oh,
right behind the till.
oh, no
It was
kidding.
built on, that was the guy who built the building said, "Oh yeah, there's a big chunk of quartz coming up right there."
Right. And
So,
that would create, we presume, a portal or a vortex to
or
draw,
to
or even energy to draw
tap
ghosts
energy.
in. And yeah.
And again, it's on the beach. It's only a few hundred yards from tidal water and a
And
river. So
let's also acknowledge that we live in a rainy part of the world too, you know? I mean,
just a bit.
just a little bit,
It's a
especially this
rainforest.
past season.
Yeah. Our
And
lovely rainforest.
oh, exactly. And same in the UK. And, you know, what are some of the hot spots? Well, of course, UK has a lot of history as well, thousands of years. So a lot of buildup of historical personalities, if you will. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's part of the water thing again, is our rainy climate.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We get into this. Looking back in of your 39 or now into the 50s haunted locations, which one really comes to mind as being the most active?
Ah, well, that's a great question. I hate to, yeah, use that cliche, but it is a great question, because if you'd asked me that a year or so ago, I'm sure my answer would have been different. But today, having had the privilege of visiting at this location this past summer, I will tell you that my answer now is St. Paul's Hospital in downtown Vancouver.
You got into St. Paul's?
Yes,
Oh,
and I
that
I
is so cool.
I felt very fortunate because it's not easy to get there. All I can't name names because that person is working there
And yeah,
and swore me to secrecy, and I will obviously uphold that because I'm a good fellow and like to keep my sources to myself. And plus, we don't want that person being bombarded by requests and also being given a hard time by his
staff.
or her
Yeah,
colleagues. Yes,
yeah.
exactly. But had a tour of the old buildings out at St. Paul's Hospital. And if you don't know, there's two or three old sections of St. Paul's that go back to the early 1900s and into the 1930s. And we got to go in there, and fascinating. And there's lots of ghosts as well in the more modern section of the hospital, in the Providence building.
Yeah.
But I was asked not to publish or talk about those stories as much because that's where all the patients are.
Yeah.
And there are some scary active ghosts in there that, for the average person, a patient going in there, I'm sure they would be terrified.
Yeah.
So I can't say much, James, but I can talk about the old section quite
Yes,
freely.
please.
Yeah, the whole hospital, you know, my little saying now is more ghosts than you can shake a stethoscope at, you know. It is, you know, I'm sure you know the classic haunted places for those of us in the know are, you know, asylums, right? Those are classic. Old mansions, of course. Well, hospitals too. That's why there's a series, I suppose, on TV, Haunted Hospitals, right? Because they get so many stories. And old hotels, of course.
Theater.
Anyhow,
Yeah.
yeah, because so many people pass through. And of course, at hospitals and hotels, so many people pass away. And so St. Paul's was a Catholic hospital. And in the day, back in the early 1900s, well, even prior to that, but the buildings that are there today were run by nuns and priests. And the nuns lived on site, as did some of the priests, and in the old building where their dormitories are. And plus, of course, there were patient rooms and so forth. And there was also a psychiatric ward in there that's since gone. It's been moved into the newer building. And there is just a whole plethora of experiences that people have in there today. The ghosts of nuns are seen walking down the hallways. Shadows, forms are seen all over. The people who work in the building overnight, or the old buildings, it's often that people are doing support work, such as for IT and, the computer systems in there, and other people doing office work. They will be working early in the morning or late at night, and they'll hear footsteps coming down the long corridors that are in those old buildings. And they'll look out thinking, that's strange. Nobody there. They've had things move on them. They've been touched. They've heard phantom voices. Things I can talk about in the newer building include the apparition of an old woman who they believe was a psychiatric patient in the 1960s. And she has a beehive hairdo and running mascara, and she's in an old style smock that psychiatric patients used to wear. And she roams throughout part of the new building. I can't say where, but she can be a bit, excuse the expression, bitchy. She can actually get in people's faces. And she can be somewhat aggressive. So, it just goes on and on. Apparitions of doctors, apparitions of nurses. The nurses that do night shift in the newer building on a certain 2 or 3 floors know very well that there are ghosts. But they tend to ignore them for a couple of reasons. One is because they don't want to encourage, they think that the more they think and talk about it, it will encourage the phenomenon more.
Okay.
And they don't want that to happen to their patients. And I think the other thing is probably also an element of they don't want to get ridiculed by upper management.
Yep.
And so, I've mentioned all this in the latest edition of the book, Ghosts of Vancouver. So for anyone who's interested, please check out that chapter. I had to cut out 3 or 4 pages just because of I had been asked to do that.
Okay, it happens, especially when we're dealing with hauntings these hauntings have been going on for decades. And now things are just starting, well, I shouldn't say now, but in the last 10 years, last decade, things are starting to come forward, getting a lot more stories, but those buildings still have to be an active business.
Yeah.
Or they have an active clientele. And not everybody has an ease with dead people walking around.
That's exactly right.
Sorry, I found in talking to people over the years, there's a number of reasons why they don't cross over. One is their children, and they're literally, when their great grandmother they've never seen comes to them and says, "Okay, Billy, you've got to come with me," they say, "I'm going to wait for mom and dad."
Yeah.
And that they'll stay. And so a lot of them are in hospitals. So you got a lot of kids. The other ones are, again, they believe, like the carpenter that I brought home, he had work to do. He was still doing something. It was an unfinished business.
Yes.
Other one is they don't know they're dead, which is, that, snap in a war or a bad accident, that kind of thing. And the other ones are, they have a religious fear of crossing. My God, I broke one of the 10 commandments. I coveted my neighbor's wife, therefore I'm going to go to hell. I'm good. I'll stay back. And a friend of mine, Mark Nesbitt, who runs the Ghosts of Gettysburg tours, a paranormal investigator, historian, he also says he deals a lot with the ghosts on the battlefield of Gettysburg. He says it's a camaraderie thing.
Okay. Yeah.
They don't want to cross because they're guys they've been fighting with for 4 years are still there. So they all want to kind of hang out. So that was kind of a new one. So when you were talking about the nuns walking the halls, or the priests, or even some of the nurses, they're not crossing over. In my belief is that they still believe if they leave, no one will be there to help those who haven't crossed in front of them, the children, those with mental health challenges who are very mixed up and don't know they're dead and are getting in your face all the time because you can't help them and they don't know why you can't see them. So they're there kind of they don't believe they should leave those spirits. So they're still
Yes. Yes. And to follow what you're saying there too, I think not only in the case of the nuns at St. Paul's Hospital are they there helping those who are dying or passing, but also they're known to help the living.
Yes.
So in the chapter on St. Paul's in the book, tell a story of how there's a well-known ghost or spirit of a nun who, when somebody is new to working at St. Paul's on their first day, they typically have to go around the various old buildings and collecting things such as their badge, their pass, to get them through all the doors and all the buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you've ever been to St. Paul's Hospital, outside of the Providence building, the modern building, it's a labyrinth because they connected up 3 or 4 different buildings over the course of 80 years. And so there's unique passageways and that take you from one building to another, and it's easy to get lost. So it's a story about how new nurses on their first day they need to go from Providence to an old part of the Comox building. It's quite the route march that they have to take to go to the room to pick up their new electronic pass. And many times the new nurses will get turned around and lost. Well, there's a well-known story about how many of them encounter or see up ahead as they're walking, trying to find their way, the apparition of a nun just up ahead, far ahead, turning a corner. So they'll think, oh, I'll follow that nun, see if I can ask her. And they'll try and catch up, and they only just see her up ahead turning the next corner. And eventually they get led by the nun to the room on this floor where they need to pick up their badge.
That is cool.
Yeah, and the person that showed us around St. Paul's, that had happened to that person. She said, that's firsthand. She says, I'm not the only one, but it's happened to others.
That is very, very cool.
Yeah.
And that's in your newest book out?
That's the one that's on sale today. Yep, that's edition 6.
So we go to your website, ghostsofvancouver.com. We can find that and have the Amazons bring it to our house.
Amazons from .ca, .com, .uk will all send it to you.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
And and if they can't find your house, they'll just follow the nun.
Yeah. Exactly.
That is cool because I've never been in St. Paul's. I've driven past it, and it's one of those places like Riverview or any of the S&DL back in the day. These great big old stone 1800s kind of hospitals, and it's a friend of mine was in an accident in the early 80s, taking an ambulance to there, and had never been to St. Paul's before, and he was coming to because he had broken his hip or something, and he's kind of drugged up. As he woke up in the morning, there were 2 nuns and a priest praying at the foot of his bed. Oh. The first thing he thought, he was getting the last rites.
Oh no!
Because he didn't know he was in a Catholic hospial, so it was like, "Oh, holy cow! What happened?" So,
don't, yeah.
Please don't. See, there was another Catholic hospital in New Westminster, St. Mary's. A friend of mine was a nurse in there, and she didn't have any stories, which sucked. But it's now demolished, and there's an apartment building in there. And I'm always curious if that apartment building contains any of the residue.
Yes. Good question. And you probably know, or if you don't, St. Paul's Hospital has been sold for development. It was sold to a development company for just under $1 billion back in September. And they're going to move the hospital, build a new one near Terminal and Main. So the sale of the hospital, the old one, will partially fund or mostly fund the construction of the new. And when the old hospital is demolished, I think they have to keep certain heritage facades, but basically it'll be high rises with condos, apartments.
Okay.
So will those apartments have any residual effects of any of those spirits? It will be interesting.
Yeah,
But those stories won't come out for quite some time, I'm sure.
well, we've had the old British Columbia Penitentiary,
Yes.
BCPN, where there were
Yes.
executions. Same with Ocala Prison. Those grounds are now houses, residential area,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
townhouses, or Woodlands, which was another really horrific institution that saw
Mhm.
a lot of abuse of children and murder and death and mayhem, are now apartment complexes. So I, I haven't heard anything about them, but then again, I've kind of been out of the, hey, if you got a haunted house, phone me
Right.
clientele kind of.
Have you heard about I'm just trying to think of the name of it, the gatehouse, the former gatehouse of BC Penn in New Westminster?
I've heard that could be haunted, but I'm not sure because it's not
It
really
is.
other than a cafe.
It is, and that is one of the new locations in the latest version of the book, Ghosts of
Okay.
Vancouver. Been out there a couple of times with Cold Spotters and had the privilege of meeting the fellow who runs the cafe there, the Royal Crown Cafe. It's changed names once or twice. I hope that I've got the name right. Anyway, it's definitely haunted. There's a ground floor, which is the cafe cum pub. And above that is the upper floor that used to be the offices for the BC Penn, and it's empty now, but for a while it was a spa, a day spa. And there's stories of patrons, customers having had massages and being touched not just by the masseuse or the masseur,
Oh, okay.
but by something that when they jumped up, there was nobody with them. Also in the basement is where the holding cells were underneath the Royal Crown Cafe. They were the holding cells for the prisoners who were transitioning in and out of the penitentiary or on their way to and from their court appearances. And there are 6 or 7 cells down there that today are storage rooms for the pub cafe upstairs. And the manager there, the owner of the business, has told us that, oh yeah, they see apparitions down there, shadow figures, hear footsteps. They've also had cold winds blowing at them, but there's no explanation because there's no windows down there. It's a basement, and there's no explanation for how a cold wind will come from a blank end of a hallway all the way down at them. So that location is haunted and a really great place to go if you want a nice brunch or a lunch and a beer. I'm not getting paid to say that.
Yeah. Okay, but I will do that. Have you ever gone to or ever found the cemetery that's out there?
Yeah, the day that we went out there the first time a couple of years ago, I had to skedaddle after the lunch meeting for Cold Spotters, and they went off to the cemetery afterwards. I did not accompany them, but I am aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been there myself. I've been to the what's it called? There was a cemetery in New Westminster, and
Yes.
not Fraserview. Maybe it is Fraserview.
It might be.
It goes back to the 1930s, and
Yes.
I had a tour of it. They have themed tours,
Huh.
and the tour that I was on was people who died in accidents. So it was the Royal Engineers who had died when something happened, and then a cart full of wood, it broke away from the horse and it tumbled and killed 3 people, and then a bunch of kids from the high school who had gone skating on a lake back in the day when lakes used to freeze here.
Yes.
And one would fall through, and then the next one would come and try to get him, and he'd die, and then the teacher would come and they'd die, and they're all lined up, all the kids who died going through the ice, and it was kind of freaky. But have you ever done a paranormal investigation in a cemetery?
Oops, sorry, you froze there, James. Sorry, what was the question?
Have you ever done a paranormal investigation in a cemetery?
Yes. One of my first outings with Cold Spotters was at the cemetery here on Fraser Street, which is Mountain View, is it?
Mountain View? Okay.
Yeah. Fraser Street between 33rd and 20 something. Anyway, yes. So we did do that and spent several hours one summer evening out there. I didn't get any success in seeing anything. The Cold Spotters crew have told me that they have seen shadow apparitions out there,
Really?
darting between graves. Yes. Oh, yeah, and there's a cemetery in the Fraser Valley, and that's kind of a now certain ghost groups hang on to their private locations for fear that other groups are going to go in, move in, and take ownership, if you will. So I can't mention the name, but there is an old
God's sake.
cemetery. Pardon?
I said, oh, for God's sake.
Oh, I know, but I have to keep these secrets to
Yeah.
my good friends.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a cemetery out there that is very old. It's let's just put it this way. It's somewhere between Chilliwack and Agassiz and out that way.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
I know where you are. Yeah.
okay. So, and they've had some interesting experiences out there. And in fact, one of them was actually a potential Sasquatch encounter out at that cemetery. So
Interesting.
yeah, which fascinated me. One of the group saw this very tall shadow figure in the tree line at the edge of this place, and smelled the smell. You know, the classic Sasquatch or Bigfoot
And of
smell.
course, they've got footage of this because each of them have cameras.
In this case, no, it was a personal experience.
Okay.
But I do trust the person
Before
involved.
cell phones. Okay.
She doesn't make up stories.
Good.
And no, she says, she can't be sure, but she smelled that classic smell and heard some heavy breathing and saw this very tall, what she figured was about 9-10 feet tall, standing out there. And she turned quickly away and walked swiftly away and counted herself as fortunate she didn't get too close.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to have to go out there. You see, I always under the impression, or I've always had the belief system that why would a ghost be in a cemetery when you could be in a bar?
I agree. And I was very dubious of this for a very long time. And I sort of am. But a fellow I met through the Cold Spotters group, who's a psychic, I asked him, because he came out on this first outing to Mountain View. And I said, why would, ghosts be in the cemetery? Why wouldn't they move on? Or if they loved living at a certain place or hanging out somewhere, why wouldn't they go there? He said, well, Greg, he said, the thing is, a lot of cemeteries in the Western world have a lot of Christians buried in them. And if you think, if you're a devout Christian, you believe in the rapture, in Jesus will come back and they will rise again. So he said he has talked to some of these spirits and they've said, well, I'm staying here with my body waiting for the rapture.
Okay.
Hey, that was one person's experience or opinion. I take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah,
I thought, oh, okay.
Why not? If that's what he was told, that's what
I must admit,
dead person believed.
Yeah.
I found that if you wanted to get a reaction of anything, you read the name on the tombstone. Just read a bunch of them. And eventually you get one that'll show up going, who are you? Why are you reading my name? What are you doing here? Like I was in Wales.
Yeah.
I heard my name. You're standing on my body here. I thought I'd come drop by, but I don't know who you are. What are you doing? So you get that kind of vibration, that kind of who the heck are you energy, and then it goes away real quick.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, but
I must admit, cemeteries are not my favorite place to go investigating. It's too, how do I put this? It's
intrusive.
So wide open. Pardon?
I was going to say intrusive.
Well, yeah, there's that. There's that, and stepping over graves. I'm not superstitious necessarily, but no, it's about, if you go into a building, an enclosed space, you get a better sense of where you might need to be to go investigating, to go looking. But you go out to a huge cemetery such as Mountain View, and it's many acres, right? And I don't know where to start, stop, and end. Where do I go? Where's my best chances of maybe seeing something? And so, I don't know, maybe it's just a personal thing. I guess it is a personal thing, but I just find myself wandering around going, well, what are my odds here? You know, it's such a vast area.
Yeah, it's fascinating. What are the places that you, well, I guess, got the most evidence from?
Well, it would be the mansion I was talking about earlier, Overland in North Burnaby. I've had the privilege of going there several times with the Cold Spotters group, and that's a location that never fails, so to speak. You know, some nights it's very quiet, but mostly, you know, you'll come away with an EVP, you know, usually a pretty decent EVP, or we've caught things on camera once or twice we couldn't explain. Always noises, always doors slamming, footsteps, that sort of thing. So never disappoints.
Do they charge you to go to places like that?
No. And for those who are listening thinking, oh, well, we got to get ourselves in there, please don't bother, because it's a personal connection that gets us in there. And that person does not want to be bothered. So it is a privileged access.
Is that person alive? I'm kidding.
Oh, yeah. No, it's the little girl.
You know, it's dead people.
Yeah. So, you know, it's unfortunate that the fighting amongst groups to own certain locations comes in, but it does. We can't avoid it.
It is crazy. We talk about a residential school, a horrible chapter in Canadian history with First Nations, but I've done a number of investigations there. When I left the group, I heard that they had approached the band members of Stolo Nation saying, we should be the only ones allowed in here. But, you know, the management of the buildings is like, who the hell are you?
Yeah.
We let you in, but you don't own the building. And if someone else asks, why would we say no? Yeah. Well, you run them by me and I'll tell you if they're worthy. It's like, okay, aren't we on our high horse?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And I know this is an international phenomenon, but if you're a 20-something girl who wants to make her name for television or become an influencer and social media, have a YouTube thing let's do the paranormal thing. So all of a sudden you've got 1,000 paranormal teams popping up, all wanting to be on TV.
Yep. And they're all the wannabes. Yep.
Yeah. And it's horrible because they're not doing it basically for the right reasons. They're curious and they think it's fun. It's like, it goes with my purse. Yeah. I shouldn't say that. It's demeaning. But it almost is that attitude of, I want to be famous and look, this is a cheap way of doing it.
Yeah. I agree. It's become sort of trendy, if you will, to use that old term. But I've seen an interesting shift, and I'm sure you've seen it too. You know, in the old days, you know, pre-internet, let's say, or pre-2000s, you would have a select few really keen, semi-professional paranormal investigators, like your Peter Underwoods and your, you know, who else am I thinking of? Hans Holzer and so on in the States, and who would be privileged to get to know certain people and have unique access into these locations and write books about it. When it was on the fringe and when people, you know, maybe their readership was quite small, including people like you and me. And then we got the internet and vlogging and blogging and, you know, all that good stuff. And then, as you just said, everybody wants to be on the bandwagon now, having seen the TV shows and everything. And so that protectionism has come in amongst the various groups. You know, you might criticize it, and for good reason. There's no point in making possessive play on a location that you don't own. However, you can understand why, because there's so many wannabes trying to get in there and bugging the owners, who, quite frankly, don't have any business being there.
Yeah,
they do it for a laugh or a lark, and they're not taking it seriously, or like you say, they just want to get hits on YouTube or what have you.
Yeah, that's the frustrating part for me. Well, I was on a live podcast, I think in 2014 when I started. We went to 2017, and from 2014 to today, like everyone's got a podcast.
Yeah.
You can have a podcast on knitting steel wool into Volkswagens. It's which actually would be kind of cool. But
yeah,
no,
that'd be really actually.
but everyone's podcast all of a sudden was the thing. Oh, you've got to listen to my podcast because, and I interview a lot of authors in the paranormal on all the different aspects of what we call paranormal or what has been termed paranormal. And they could have a full-time job just doing podcasts every friggin' night. And it's painful. Some of them will have to pay, they have agents that they pay $100 to when the agent hooks them up with a podcast. They have no idea where this podcast is. It's somebody who just started it Wednesday, but they just kicked $100 to their agent who phoned Bob's podcast and dry cleaning and to get their client on to sell books to the 11 people that listen.
Wow.
So it's amazing the amount of people that are out there. And like you have a book, but you're not beating people over the head to buy it. It's a niche market. It's a special interest. And my listener / viewer, that is what they're interested in. And I know that because it's been 6 years that I've been doing this. 6, 7, 6,
right.
6.5.
Right.
Okay. So like, I know what they're interested in. So this is of interest to me. And this is international because it's in the ether. It's out there online. But but there's still, no matter if I'm talking to somebody about haunted Chicago or Sacramento, California, or Victoria or Vancouver, there's a market for people who are just interested to hearing what you've bumped into and what you've done. So I really appreciate you coming by.
Oh, my pleasure.
Before I kick you out of here, after, or I shouldn't say after because you're still ongoing here, but what are some of the biggest questions you still have when it comes to life after death?
Well, yeah, it's a deep question. It's a difficult question to answer. I'll take a stab at it.
Oh, take your time. I got lots of tea left. I'm good.
Okay, good. I've got some water and I think a touch of wine. My mom passed a year and a half ago, and only child and close to my parents and close to my mom, and she knew what I was interested in. Well before she got ill. She told me one time, we're talking about ghosts and so on. And her sister is my aunt in Wales who's had all these experiences. And she said, well, and my mom was open-minded and was a Reiki practitioner, for goodness sake, into ki and energy, body energy. But she said, yeah, I'm not sure, Greg, about the hereafter and so forth. And I said, well, I think so. And then she passed, and I did have a unique personal experience. However, after she left us, but it was personal. It was not something I would say was evidence of the hereafter. It could have been my own psychology, And so one of the big questions for me is, is it because I'm blocked psychically that I can't sense her or see her, or she hasn't visited, or is it not there? Maybe everything I've come to believe, even though I'm grounded in skepticism, I still have had these experiences and know so many people who swear up and down they have. Is it all wrong? I have good friends who are doctors who would say to me, Greg, you still ghost hunting? These are good guys who are scientists and excellent doctors, and I can't blame them for saying that. So the big question for me is, can it ever be proved to myself before I leave the planet? Will it ever be known or proved to everybody in our lifetimes or ever? Or is there just, if it does exist, is the veil too thick for us to really know and be satisfied that the answer is yes? I hope that helps answer it, but that's huge for me.
Yeah, it's a question that it's a beer conversation.
Yeah.
It's a sit down for a whole other hour and kind of discuss.
Or more.
Yeah.
It gets into heavy philosophy and logic. And I have friends who are philosophy teachers who would say, Although I think one of them has come around to the fact that, you know, some of this phenomena does actually happen, even though it's a lot of just personal evidence.
Yeah.
Hearsay.
It's like you say, the doctors kind of scoff at that, but maybe they've never worked in the Vancouver General Hospital emergency room.
Well,
Because,
funnily enough, both doctor friends spent stints at St. Paul's Hospital
oh, really?
doing some studies, some residences, and neither of them had any experiences. But I would say mostly the nurses and full-time staff
Yeah.
would have the experiences just because of the shifts they work, etc.
And it's also when we look at, again, we're talking about the term empath, which has been beaten to death and pulled like silly putty in 10 different directions. But one of the things I find is, again, that talking to somebody who is that way intuitive, their career choices are literally maids, butlers, bartenders, waiters, waitresses,
Yeah.
teachers,
Yes.
nurses. They are people who have gravitated to the helping profession.
Good
I
point.
will help you. And they're no good in cubicles. They're no good sitting down writing a book in a cubicle somewhere and having other people go research and bring it back like some professors do. They're no good at that. They can't. They need to be having a human interaction.
Yes.
And that's what their energy is for. Like your mother's energy was more helping another person, not all about her core, herself.
Right.
So that's why you get a lot of nurses that are a little more open to it. There was a television series actually about the paranormal activity around the Vancouver General Hospital and the interviews with the nurses and the doctors there about the stuff that they saw. And one of the nurses who was on that was actually, she lives locally here, and I met her at the dog park. And she told me this great story about a fella comes in. There was a girl who, a 17-year-old girl comes whipping in, emergency. She was in a bad car accident. They bring her into one of the holding rooms, waiting, to get her into to see the surgeon, and she passes.
Yeah.
So they pull her out, and another guy comes in, and he's got like a really bad, gallbladder attack or something. He's there, and they stick him in there until they can get space in emergency. And he starts screaming, "Get her out of here! Get her out of here!" And the nurses come running in, and he's pointing in the corner going, "Get her out." And he describes the girl who died, who is freaking out because she's dead, and now she doesn't know where her body is. And he's there, and he can see her, and she's freaking out. And all the nurses are going, "Oh, okay, that's weird," because he did not see her, but he's totally describing what she's wearing and what she's doing, and she's freaking out. So
fascinating.
What do you do? Bring her body back in, saying, "Hop in, around the corner." "No, you can't come in. You're out. Sorry, you got to go. There's a light." "Oh, no, not that light. There's an exit light. Not that's the entrance." "Oh,
yes,
no."
Yeah. Go that way through the ceiling. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So what do you think happens to us when we die?
Well, that's the golden question, isn't it? I can't say for sure. I would never say for sure. And anyway, but
And you don't want to know for a while.
Well, no, not for as long as possible. Let's draw it out. I'm enjoying
it out a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see how this part ends, but
yeah,
I want to believe. I want to do a Fox Mulder. I want to believe, and I've had some pretty good anecdotal evidence that when we pass, there is something about us, an energy body, part of our consciousness that straddles between this universe and another, and maybe that falls into the realm of quantum physics. We could talk about that till the cows come home. That anyway leaves this body and passes into another dimension, another realm. We go home, apparently, according to the psychics and those in the so-called know. We go home. This is not our home. This is our learning place. This is our school for X number of years when we go back to source, and it's all about the learning.
Yep.
And I do live my life like that. I'm an adult educator, and I know my life has been a lot about learning how to be a better person and skills in this realm, and that's my personal belief.
And that's a good one.
Yeah. And I think that's on that other side for us all. And of course, to my friends who are doctors and philosophers and so on, I could be totally wrong and there's nothing there. I hope not, though, because to me, this life, all this wonderful learning and hard learning at times, is for what? Is for nothing? It's nihilism, it's for nothing. I struggle with that.
Very cool. Again, thank you. We've been talking to Greg Mansfield. He is the author of Ghosts of Vancouver. Check out his website, ghostsofvancouver.com. Get his book. I'm going to get the book because it's about my town and where I live. And I want to go out and poke around some of these places. Thanks very much, Greg.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, James. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out here.
From the mountains to get the man down.